More Beats in Life, Fifth Element Live. The elements of hip hop are DJing, graffiti, breaking, knowledge, and.
Yo, mama.
Biddy, did you come here to play or did you come here to finesse?
We can't all get a pair of socks?
I told you, Patrick, I was coming for you. I took you out.
You're still whack, copy?
Word. And shout out to Dom, aka True. You're still whack, copy. What's up, y'all? This is Patrick Washington, aka the Black Picasso of the Almighty Poem Season. I'm here for the fall edition of the WBL Book Fair. And this one is going to be real special because I've got two old friends coming together. We're going to chop it up. We're going to have a good time. Before I get into that, I got to take care of some housekeeping, though. For those who don't know, I am the director of poetry for Words, Beats, and Life, and we have some wonderful events coming up for the fall. First thing I want to tell you about is the Slam-tastic season kickoff. That is happening Friday, November 4th. Friday, November 4th from 8 to 10 p.m. It's for all youth poets ages 13 through 19. We're going to gather at Busboys and Poets, 450 K Street. Busboys at 450 K Street. It's going to be a poetry competition and an open mic. This is your chance to take your shot at becoming a member of the DMV Youth Poetry Slam team. So save that date, Friday, November 4th at Busboys 450K. We have a lot of great stuff coming up. Anybody who is interested in applying for Youth Poet Laureate, okay, we're not just looking for poets. We want people who are civically engaged. We want people who are active in their communities. And we have a online application for you to check out. You can go to wblinc.org/DMVYPL. So definitely check that out. Yeah, we have some other things, but I'll tell you about that later on. I want to start off by bringing in our interviewer, good friend of mine from back in the day. This is the one and only Truth Thomas.
What's up, brother?
What's up, fam? How you been?
Hey, man, I'm blessed, man. It's an honor to be here. I'm proud of you and all that you're doing for poetry and in the DMV, and it's just a blessing to see you, man. And
hey, likewise. Look, you're talking about me, but you have had a long and storied career. Particularly poetry-wise. I've known you just to be a luminary here in the DMV area. When I was a baby poet, your name was out there, making some moves, and like you've been a fixture for so long. You grew up in a musical family. Is that correct?
yeah. I'm a musician, man. I'm a singer-songwriter. I was signed to Capitol long before I thought about poetry as something that I would like to pursue without music. But yeah, that's my background, man. But you were talking about our relationship, man. I don't know if you remember, but long before I was looming or was really writing anything well, man, you were the host at Teaism, man. The first time it was you and Del Rica, man. It was you
Wow.
at Teaism. You were the cat that introduced me, man. I remember that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Shout out to Dorica, wherever you are. You're right. See, you're taking me back now. See, we need to sit down somewhere and chop it up later on. I want to talk to you about so much, man. Your NAACP Image Award that you earned in 2013. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
For a poetry collection called Speak Water.
Yes.
Water. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Outstanding literary work in 2013. But yeah, what drew you to Tara and her work?
First of all, I had heard about Tara long before I met her as a luminary in New York, and we ended up going to the same MFA program, the same grad school for poetry in Henniker at New England College. So that's where we really, I think, bonded as I feel like, a sister and brother in poetry. And we've always had a connection. I've always loved her work and her spirit. And very, I'm very proud of her. And I want to congratulate her today for this book, Refuse to Disappear, which is magnificent.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I'm gonna take a moment to do just a quick intro and just say that Tara Betts is the author of three full-length poetry collections. Her debut was Ark and Hugh on the Willow Books imprint of Aquarius Press. Um, Break the Habit, which was published in October 2016 with Trio House Press, and this collection, as mentioned, titled Refuse to Disappear. Tara has worked with several organizations all across the country, but most notably Gallery 37 and Young Chicago Authors, shout out. And she received her PhD in English creative writing at Binghamton University in 2014. In 2010, Essence named her as one of their 40 favorite poets. Definitely one of my favorites. So I want to bring in Tara Betts. Taking the sip. That's right.
Yes.
That's right. Sip those accolades. Ah. How are you? Uh-oh. We didn't hear you.
I said I was doing pretty good. Trying to stay hydrated and moisturized, as the people say these days.
Yes, 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 yes. You're doing it very well. You're glowing over there.
Hey,
Yes, yes. So look. I've taken up 6 minutes of your time already, so I want to get as much as possible from the two of you. So let me back out. I present True Thomas and Tara Betts in conversation.
thank you, Patrick.
Yo, my sister. Yo, it's
Hey,
a blessing to see you and to read this book, Refuse to Disappear. I read it, and a couple of things struck me right away. And one of them is that it's a very ambitious book. You take a lot of poems uh, and beautifully crafted work that's available on the WordWorks press, WordWorks, the
yes.
WordWorks. If you're looking to pick up a pre-order, I think it's wordworksbooks.org. So you can pre-order your books now, correct? Okay. I want to
Oh,
ask
the
you
book
when
came out in July.
in July. Okay.
So,
So you can order the book now.
yeah, the book is out. It's on wordworks.org and SPD and Amazon and bookshop.org. So it's out there. You can find it.
I encourage everybody to pick it up. It's an important book. And one of the reasons I say that is because it seems like, and you know this, Tara, everything in America and many other parts of the world wants to erase people of color, to
Yeah.
act like we don't matter. And you've made a very bold statement that we do, that you do, and especially that Black women do.
Yeah.
And I think that's uh, critically needed as we move forward in America, as we move forward in these elections that are looming.
Right.
It's important to be reminded of the fact that people of color are not, like Ralph Ellison once so eloquently articulated in his book,
Yeah.
invisible. We're here, we have been here. And I love the way you give odes to people from the past who all too often are dismissed from um, the history books of America. So it's important to be reminded and taught. There's a lot of teaching in the book. I appreciate that. A lot of teaching.
Try
One,
not to be too didactic.
say again.
I said I try not to be too didactic.
See, I'm in church right now. There are times to be didactic. There
Right.
are times to say that racism is wrong. There are times to say that um, it was good for Solange Knowles to speak up in an elevator. There are times
Yeah.
to point out that that Black women like uh, um, Sandra Bland and Nina Simone, and both the Simones you mentioned in your book, Simone Biles, and who's the other sister?
Um, the swimmer. Now my brain is. It's a Sunday and I'm not caffeinated, so that's why.
Okay, we're gonna
Um,
say, and you,
but the
and for
poem
those
is
who are
Bones. I
quick
know.
on her last name, you can put it in the chat. But for the sister who is the Olympic notable, it's good to be reminded that those people are here because they don't get talked about a lot. So I want to ask you, uh, and let me say this: I've noticed that a lot of books are journeys for people. They're journeys for the authors in the writing, and they're journeys for the readers who embrace the work. How did the writing of this book uh, impact you? Did you learn anything in the process of this composition that you didn't know before?
Hmm. You know, I kind of realized more than ever that we have we have our obsessions, right? Like the things that we just keep thinking about, that we keep coming back to, and once you've kind of done that, you're on autopilot. You can keep writing in that vein. Or, if you've been researching something for a while, since now we have a lot of these historically based poetry books, once you've gone down the rabbit hole, it's like you inhabit that world. And I wish I was trying to go towards that kind of book initially at first, but being that I've done so much teaching in different places and so much community based work and stuff like that, I just was, in editing, it's like a lot of brain time and a lot of physical energy. And I was just like writing here and there. And a friend of mine, Jill Petty, who I mentioned in the acknowledgments, who's a book editor, she said, why don't you just take all the poems you've written over the past couple years and drop them into a Word document? I've never done that before. I've always been really deliberate. And I drop it in the Word document and I send it to her, right? She goes, I think you got a book here. She's like, sequence it, see what happens. So I started kind of grouping poems together and then I started to see it. It wasn't the book I initially imagined, where I wanted to write about Black women in science fiction and comic books, but instead it ended up looking like there were separate suites, and they were kind of like this trinity of things that I think about, like, um, what does it mean to feel confined or like you have limitations? What does it mean to be a Black woman in America? And then also, what does it mean to somehow be in the margins in one way or another? Whether it's how you express your love, or, because you're locked up, or because you're older, or because you're a woman, or because you're Black. Like, I felt like I had these poems that kind of didn't fit into one of those categories, or maybe they fit into multiples. So it kind of took me in those directions when I was organizing the book. And I said, oh, it's like everything swirling around in that cauldron of a brain.
No, it's beautiful, and I think that comes through. I wondered, and
Mhm.
by the way, just checked my notes. The swimmer's name is Manuel. Last name is Simone Manuel. Ashley
Simone
Manuel.
Manuel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, you talk about so much in the book. You give dap to Uhuru, the original Uhuru from Star Trek, that nobody should
Mr.
forget.
Shelnick.
Um,
Yeah.
all of these things are part of who we are. I wondered also, because there are so many stories about great Black women, great Black people, tragic stories about the impact of racism on our people. How did you know who to include and who to save for another book?
Well, I mean, I think the people who like Lieutenant Uhura, I knew I wanted her to be in this book. I wanted this to be in print before she was gone. And it was, so I was really happy about that. But I think, that's been part of my project as a scholar and a poet, is that I told myself early on when I started working as a teaching artist, I want to be there for young Black women. I want to be there for young women. I want to be there for Black people. Like, I'm rooting for everybody Black. I'm also rooting for all the sisters. So, but I think that's been part of my project. But then also I said, okay, how do we do that in the literary realm? Right.
Mhm.
So I started reviewing books. I started writing essays. I started thinking about not just who I want to see in the poems, but what archetypes do I want to draw on? Because so often, when you're in an MFA program or you read a lot of contemporary poetry, they're still drawn on Greek mythology.
Yes, they
They're still
are.
still looking at Shakespeare and the Bible, and you can learn from that. I think those are all useful texts. But also, there's other stuff that doesn't come out of a European tradition, or it hasn't been tainted by that in some way, you know? I mean, even though most of what we're probably gonna read is in the English language, and we know English has its problems too.
Amen.
You know?
Amen.
Mhm.
I want to let uh, the audience know that among the many beautiful poems that are in Refuse to Disappear, that is on WordWorks, the WordWorks, I'm going to say that again so you can pick it up now, are odes to Ella Fitzgerald, Nina Simone, Shanika Dream, Marie Laveau, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Solange Knowles, Wangari Maathai. Am I pronouncing that right, T?
One
Wangari,
garden thigh.
Sandra Bland, TLC. Yo, I mean, it's rich. We could just have a book on TLC. It's rich because there's a
Mhm.
book of uh, uh, complexity in each of the poems that you write, and that's one of the things that I like about your work because it's. I heard somebody say that it's smart. Well, it's absolutely smart, but it's more than that. I mean, yes, and I want because I know they meant well when they said that, but it's an ode to the collective genius of Black people, and
Mhm.
it's timely. I think for many reasons. One of the other things I appreciate is the depth that you give for a whole bunch of sections of the country. When we first met, you were living in New York, in Brooklyn. And
Right.
I used to call you Brooklyn Bet, but you move around so much, I can't do that anymore, right? So,
Well, not so
uh,
much now. Not so much now.
mm, so Chicago is home.
I hope so. I hope Chicago is home. I've thought about moving back out your way. If I was gonna move again, I might consider the DC area or Philly. But
Okay,
you
Patrick, you
know,
got that? You write that down, bro. So make sure it's noted. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we would love
you know,
for you to be here, but you already are part of it. You know, but you give
you know
that.
that's
Yeah,
you're okay. You're breaking up, so that's why I
sorry.
paused.
I apologize. Too bad.
Yeah, I guess that's part of why I was really excited to do this, because when I went back and looked at the book recently, I realized how much of Baltimore was in the book, with Baltimore starting to sound like Babylon in there, that poem, and the Shamika Dream poem, and just thinking about how over time the DC area has been such a huge mainstay for my work and all these poets who are thinking about poetry. There's a lot of people I know from Cave Canem. There's you, and you being part of my MFA experience, but then also just being, I remember when Busboys and Poets opened and everybody wanted to go there, and you came there all the time, right? And seeing cats like Bomani Armand and Olu Butterfly and Del Rica gave me one of my first features in the DC area. So there's a very, Sonia Renee, I used to stay with her, and Tanya Maria Matthews when I would come to the city, and Abdul Ali has been a huge supporter of my work. So I feel like I have a lot of friends there. If I move there, it'd be like coming home.
We would welcome you. It is home for you.
Mm.
It occurs to me that
Mm.
it's important to say that we're all family, and you have poems that celebrate poets in California, in New York, in Baltimore, poems that celebrate freedom fighters in Kenya and in Cuba.
Great.
There's a deliberate effort to make the point, as I read the book, that we are indeed one family. And I think that is another reason the book is very important, because we don't often hear that, I think, as much as we should. I'm in a church now, and there are 850 other churches within probably, I don't know, 10 miles or 15 miles of this building. Not 850, maybe
Okay.
759. But the thing is, we're separated. We're separated for many reasons. Slavery has done
Mm.
a good job of separating us. And it's important, I think, always to be reminded that, and you do this eloquently, that we are not some magic trick that can be erased like a magician does a rabbit in a hat. That's one of my favorite poems from your book. I don't know if I can pronounce that joint. Was it for this? Can you do it for this? What is it?
Oh, prestidigitation.
I was just gonna say that. You're one of my favorite poems because you make this point. We we are magic that's not going to be erased. We are in control of our own mystery and wonder, and I love that about the book. Um,
Yeah.
I was going to
I
ask you.
know one of the things.
Go ahead. You said,
No, I was just thinking in terms of that poem. Um, I was thinking a lot about the phrase "Black girl magic," and now when I look at it, I think a lot about. I was just teaching Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man to my undergrads at Loyola, and one of the things that came up was I said, yes, he's talking about being invisible, and it's an act of subversion, but then he keeps talking about being invisible, and it's like, what happens when you live in a world that pretends to not see you? Because one of my students brought that up, like that microaggression when people act like they don't see you. You could be talking and they just keep talking like you're not there. And I said, yeah. I said, and isn't that the trick that's always been played on us? Like somehow we can never be the carriers and the dispensers of knowledge. Somehow we can never be the originators, but there's always somebody doing a cover or doing an imitation of things that have come out of, non-Western cultures. And that's a problem. That is a huge problem to assume, because not only do you covertly support racism that way, you make it where young people can never see themselves or see a certain group of people as being smart, as being leaders, as being teachers, as being educators. And we know that's not true, but to have that subtle kind of indoctrination happening all the time is something we have to constantly be self-critical about and aware of, you
I
know?
agree. I agree. I go back to the point I was making before about the poet I love who correctly said that your poems were smart. I love this poet unreservedly. But I have to add, to echo your point, we've always been smart.
Yeah,
It's not a new event.
it's not.
And your book makes this point so very well. It also is demonstrative of a human being fighting back, a black woman fighting back to make the point that um, yes, I'm here. Yes, I'm creative. Yes, I can do many things, but I'm in control. I choose. to be seen and to be in control of my own narrative. And I think, yes, it's dangerous. It's for two reasons: to be relegated to an invisibility. Part of the danger is, of course, as you well state, you're forgotten. And we see that all too often. If you drive around many parts of the country, many cities, even here, you see parts of the city in DC, for example. If you head towards Georgetown, you go down 16th Street, you make a right, you go towards the well manicured sections of the city.
Hmm.
You see hope, people with dogs walking. I don't know why it's always the dogs, but there's people with dogs and they're walking and they're vibrant. And you go to some other parts of the city where there's systematic disenfranchisement.
Right.
You can almost feel the hopelessness. We know we're invisible. We know the city doesn't care about us.
Right.
If you go to Baltimore, certain parts of Baltimore, you see the same kinds of things. In LA, Watts, I don't know how far south you went. Inglewood, and I lived in LA for 10 years. You go south in LA, where
Mhm.
um, the jungle starts, right? Compton, right? A lot of beauty in Compton,
It's really
but a lot of
pretty.
poverty. It is, but there's a lot of poverty in Compton too. So
True.
there's that invisibility. But there's also the invisibility that comes that's even worse when we've been taught to promote it. I watched the debate with Brother Warnock and Brother Walker,
Hmm.
uh, and I see evidence of that. A person
Right.
who's promoting our invisibility because he's been well trained to do that. And he's not alone. Bless him. There are many that fall into that category. So, for all those reasons, I'm encouraged by your book, and I want everybody to pick it up. And I want to ask you, if you were to read, I don't know, Tara, one poem from your book, I don't know, because it might be in front of you, what poem would that be?
Um, Gosh, that's a tough call. I, a lot of times I have been reading, and it's a habit that I've developed over the past two books. Um, I like to read the opening poem and the last poem of the book at some point when I read, but if I had to pick one, I kind of feel like, God, I don't know what I want to read. Um, there is one that's been on the tip of my tongue because, Word Beats in Life is a hip hop foundation organization in that way. Like it looks at the foundational elements of hip hop. So I have one poem that might be kind of relevant to that. Oh, okay. You just gonna put me on the spot. Okay. And it's kind of a list poem. So every line starts with because. And yeah, it's kind of my commentary on another Chicago rapper who remained nameless. Because hip hop, unlike slavery, was a choice. Because the art classes disappeared as buildings burned and ashes fluttered mid-air like insurance checks. Because the government claimed a broken window theory where those animals could not avoid breaking everything. Because those animals had ancestors who knew slavery and colonization like second and third languages, no ESL required. Because Robert Moses came through the borough like the expressway was his personal Bushido blade. Because mothers in the rundown apartments that survived collected small flat spheres of vinyl joy because they were never ashamed to dance and always spoke in codes and rhythms because breakbeats needed to be carried on the spoken wings spread by MCs, taking pride in making people sweat because aerosol cans rendered swirls and geometric orders and colors imagined by God's hands brushed across dusk because there were no schools that said they were civilized, even though their lives were burglarized daily, because Zora Neale Hurston interviewed the last surviving slave brought to America, but she couldn't profit from publication. Because Black Benji died too young, and so did Scott LaRock, And so did MC Trouble, so did Left Eye, so did B.I.G. and Tupac. Need I go on? Because Chicago made Shaka Khan, Curtis Mayfield, Muddy Waters, and Chess Records, and the city paints over them like fading murals. Because there are mothers of MCs who are educators that learned the rhetoric of sit ins, because eventually there were books and teachers that documented the languages and the past we felt obscured from textbooks, because people will struggle to keep those books in print and others will spend their last on a pair of fresh kicks. Because of the obvious sharecropping, Jim Crow, KKK, microaggressions, separate but still unequal paychecks, and misogynoir. Because de facto segregation stay holding hands with gentrification since they've been tight like that since they first got together, because Black and Brown people always create seismic shifts, then give them a way to allow new fissures to crack, because someone will always make more money off that than the creators, and the estates revert to people who ain't family, because slavery is still the fodder of American movies where people love to watch suffering, because no matter what you buy, where you live, who you marry, or how much money you have, free thoughts are contained.
Woo! That is beautiful and powerful. And I have to say, Tara, Chicago also made you. And for that, we should all be very grateful. Um,
Yeah.
what do you think? I think you told me one time we were talking about Chicago, and you said, Chicago winters will make you hardy. Yeah, I think that's what you said.
It will.
Yeah.
It will. Because you got to be used to that. You got to find a way to endure, and you learn how to be cyclical, you know? Like, you don't need to be outside all the time. Maybe you need to be indoors and be contemplative and think about reassessing and being warm, you know?
I don't know. I kind of like being warm, but let me ask you, sister. You mentioned a whole bunch of phenomenal artists Chicago made, and there's a whole bunch more. Nat King Cole, Donny Hathaway, um, again, you, Gwendolyn Brooks, um, Dr. Hakeem Madabuti, and I want to ask you, what do you think has Chicago's influence has been on you specifically that's unique, and also to the larger poetry community?
Well, I think, I mean, if we think literary wise, there's Gwendolyn Brooks, there's our current um, poet laureate of Illinois, Angela Jackson, who's also been Cave Canem faculty in recent years. But I think about those women in particular because in them, I see very much the thing that has been so instrumental for me, which is the work ethic. And not just the work ethic in terms of you grind and you show up and you're there, like you come constantly and consistently, but the attention to voice and the craft in their work. Um, Angela Jackson has written 3 novels and a play and children's books, but she's been a prolific poet for decades.
Hmm.
Um, Gwendolyn Brooks not only did so many poems, and wrote letters, and if you look at her archives, like her books, she has all these wonderful notes in her books. I've been wanting to go down to U of I because they have some of her annotated books where she's basically writing like mini essays in there. But I also like her approach to the page, right? Like how she can take stuff from the modernist poets who were not always really acknowledging how much they got from Black culture in a lot of different ways. But what Black people did with what folks like Eliot did, you know, we can read T.S. Eliot in The Wasteland, and we know at this point he was pretty much a racist and a fascist in many ways. But it took a poet like Melvin Tolson to say I'm going to out Eliot T.S. Eliot and I'm going to write Harlem Gallery, which is still a foundational book that's kind of like at the cusp of the Harlem Renaissance. So I think about that, and then I think about somebody like a Gwendolyn Brooks, who was very much into reading the modernists and how she made so many sonic choices. Like you can read a Gwendolyn Brooks poem now and it'll be like the most original word choice you can think of.
Hmm.
And it sounds good and it sounds unusual. And I love it, right? Like I have a big copy of Blacks, which speaking of Baba Haki, he published that on Third World Press and it's still in print. But it's just a big blue book. And sometimes I just carry that around and I read poems out of it, even if I'm not teaching it, because I may stumble across a line that I just didn't think about that way. Right.
Hmm.
So to me, I'd say thinking about the craft, enforcing my love of writing, enforcing a work ethic, because you have to grind to be a right. People, it's a working class city that is changing because of gentrification. But definitely, if you wanted to make that money and write, you
Hmm.
had to stay on it. And I think it really enforced that with me. Um, but I also had time to read because it wasn't as expensive to live here as it is in other cities. It's changing. Um, and I used to go down to Harold Washington Library, which has the most wonderful poetry collection. Now, sometimes you can go to Poetry Foundation. They have this huge room that looks very much, it almost looks like this picture that's framing us right now. But it's a huge room, but it's more modern and it's floor to ceiling books. And I would just go in there and just read, right? And if you can do that, sometimes that can teach you more than going to a workshop. I feel like workshops can sometimes be a good social experience and they kind of push you forward or you hear about a piece of this or a bit of that that teaches you something. But to just sit, read, figure it out on your own and piece through it, that's the real education. Kind of like, you can't really write the book until you sit down
Hmm.
and just write. Like
Yeah.
you gotta write.
The picture that they have as the backdrop. At first, I thought that was your living room
Mm-mm.
because you're one of the most well-read people I know.
Oh, thank you.
You are. I always remember you reading.
I'm always
And
behind.
one of the things that's also evident in Refuse to Disappear is your discipline, your focus, and commitment to craft in the poems. They're magnificently written. And I think anybody who's listened to just that one poem you read that has nothing to do with Kanye West would recognize that right away. That ghazal like quality in the repetitions, the fresh figurative language in the pieces that singularly you. I've always loved that. How you switch things around and change language around. I've always dug that. Uh, and oh, it's come up to buy. Refuse to Disappear by Tara Betts. You go to uh, www.spdbooks.org. You could
Mm,
you could just Google that and find Refuse to Disappear. And I encourage you to do that. I'd be remiss if I didn't offer my condolences. I believe was for the passing of your mother. Is that
mm.
correct?
Yeah, she passed in 2015, so it's been
Okay.
a while.
Okay. Um, there is a great deal of touching, gripping poetry that has to do with you making clear the point that those people closest to you are also remaining in you, a part of you. It's
Mm,
touching. You talk about um, Gwendolyn Brooks, and I'm reminded that Gwendolyn Brooks had workshops that she did with gang members in Chicago, and you
mhm.
have done workshops for brothers and sisters who were incarcerated. Is that correct?
Yes.
What was that experience like for you? going into that? And what about their voices would you like the world to know?
Well, I think for me the experience is I I really would like to impress upon people that when you go into a setting like that, you're working with people who want to learn, who want to have engagement with other people. So more often than not, I get these questions from people who've never visited anyone in prison, and it assumes that I'm not safe. That how could you be with those people? And
Hmm.
and I'm like, no, those are my people. You know what I mean? And when you say that to people, they don't expect you to say that. They're like, but Tara, you're a PhD and da da da, and you're this, you're that. I'm like, no, those are my people, just like you would be. And if you can't, just like when I tell people those are my students, they're not any different from who I teach at Loyola or DePaul or Northwestern. They're my students. And I find that people make that assumption that somehow they would not be that. And honestly, I feel like I've had a better educational experience at Stateville Prison and at Cook County Jail than I had in some schools
How?
because because they asked really good questions, because they were willing to be critical of a text and tell you why they're critical of a text. So it was a much more engaging conversation, you know, as opposed to somebody who's been told they got to go to school
Hmm.
or they really don't want to be at school. So if we think about it that way, I feel like there's a lot of people who go to college who it's like, why are you spending tuition if you don't want to be here, baby? Don't be,
Hmm.
and I'm hesitant to say that, but yeah, and somebody said, we have been taught in America through media that all people in prison deserve it and they are all dangerous. And that is TV show. Yes. And that's the other thing too. We don't talk about that contradiction that there are some people who they have the privilege of going to a good school, having support and help and therapy and all of that stuff that keeps them from ever ending up in prison in the first place.
Hmm.
And then somebody who hits a bump or makes a mistake is automatically treated like they are irredeemable, right? Because they're black, because they're poor, because they're brown, because they're an immigrant. Like all of those things come up and you see it in real life when you walk into a prison. So for them, I try to affirm that they are just as rigorous and engaging as any other student that I've had. We laugh. I tell people, they crack jokes. They're funny as hell, you know. And people go, "What? You laugh at the prison?" Yes, I laugh at the prison because they're funny. They're smart. Wouldn't you? And then what's the most therapeutic thing you can do is sometimes make each other laugh.
Amen.
It totally makes sense.
Are you still doing that? It's kind of ministry. It's a kind of poetic ministry. Are you still doing those workshops?
I was doing it for a while via written correspondence, and I noticed I wasn't getting all my letters, and and then students were like writing me talking about, why didn't you answer my last letter?
Whoa.
And I was like, I answered this, I answered that. So I think my mail was being censored,
Hmm.
which on some levels I get it. And then on other levels, I'm like, okay, how much of this was something done to kind of thwart any progress I was making with them education wise. So I've taken a break. I think the program that I was teaching through is now back to teaching in person. And I may go back, but I think I needed the break because it's very emotionally taxing too, you know, and it's just grueling kind of work.
I'm grateful uh, that you're my sister. I love you, and for all that you do, and for Brother Patrick and
Mm.
all of the artists that are in our family. What everybody does, to try to move black and brown folks forward out of the grips of racism in this country. I
Right.
like the point that you make that black and brown people, it's a understated point, but it's made, are the same people. I don't think that's said enough. We are dealing with the same kinds of struggles. Uh, uh, there's a great deal of hope in the book, and the hope, again, I think, is in the title. You know, in my, I have to say, one of my favorite poems, Tara, is the last poem. It's on page 68,
Yeah.
and I think it has an epigraph from Brother Eric Priestley. Again, you give dap to Cali. Um, I would be honored if you just read that poem. I don't know who else is listening, but just read it for me. I'm just saying, just because it's
I
just
would
us.
love to.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you asked about it because Eric was one of my internet friends. Like he would always write to me and tell me these stories about growing up in the South and how he learned so much about being autonomous and independent because he had to learn how to make things and do things. And, every once in a while he would just send me an email or, tweet me. And I told him I was working on this book and I had a poem about that he was going to be in the book. I didn't realize it was going to be the title poem yet. And before the book came to press, he passed away. And I was really sad. I wanted to send him a copy. So I think his last book was called For Keeps, and it was done on like this small press. But he wrote a couple novels. He was one of the people deeply involved with the Watts Writers Workshop.
Hmm.
So there's videos of him online
Right.
telling stories and reading his work, and I miss him. I miss hearing from him. You know, he would say this thing if he didn't want you to tell everybody. He'd be like, "Put that on a put that in a pipe and smoke it."
Hmm.
I'd be like, "You crazy?" But anyway, um, here's the poem. Refuse to disappear. The sunsets I saw are cluttered with the bones of these ashes. Time is the fire in which we burn. From Eric Priestley's Rage. The dawns I see burst with ghosts of exhumed ruins. Plans are murderers in which we disappear. We are bent to follow the maze where wall turns into wall after wall, and we keep turning where we should climb. Look over the walls. It gets more difficult to make them too high or hide a point of exit. Time may burn, and I refuse to disappear. Mm,
Yeah, yeah. I love you, sister. That's uh, powerful.
thank you.
And for every black person, for every black and brown human being, especially now, I hope that's a message that's echoed. We have to fight back. And a
Yeah,
part of that uh, fighting back has to do with saying we're in control of our narratives. We're here. We're visible. We don't have to um, swallow racism. And I really appreciate all that you're doing with that,
thank
Tara. I
you.
want to take a moment now to open up questions that some other people may have.
Mhm.
Um,
There's a question in the queue too.
go ahead.
Yeah. They said, what has been more difficult to write the books or to be published? And what advice do you give young authors or just unpublished authors that want to be published? So for me, I think I took a different route that's different from what I see a lot of younger poets doing now, which was I felt like it was more important for people to hear my work initially than to read it in a book. Because I said, the people I want to read it may not buy these esoteric literary journals that you got to go online to order now or go to, an academic library to read them. So I was like, I don't think that's where I live, you know? But when I did start to publish, I sent to journals that were specifically interested in work by Black people and women. And that was where I sort of built my confidence as a young writer. So what I tell young and unpublished writers is like, send to the places where you feel like you have kinship with the people that they publish. You know, like, are they publishing poems that you genuinely like? Are they publishing work that speaks to you? You know, and that may be completely different from the places that I initially sent from. However, I think it's really, you have to develop a thick skin because it is hard to get published. And for me, now it's kind of like, there are certain journals I've never broken into, and I don't always care whether or not I will. And you kind of got to be like that as well. And you may be surprised that journal you weren't thinking about, then all of a sudden they have a guest editor, and the guest editor likes your work, and then they hit you up because you've already been publishing in other places, and maybe they'll see your work there. And that happened to me recently. There was a young Native American poet I've never met. I've read his book, and he followed me on Twitter, and he was editing a project. And I said, "Yo, I really like your book." And he was like, "Yeah, I was trying to get in touch with you. I want some poems for this." And I was like, "How do you know about me?" So if you think about it that way, that the person that needs your poem will find your poem, it can make that process feel a little less daunting to get your poems out there. And you got to keep sending them out. Like, I know there's a lot of people, they look at the pushcart prize list because they want to win the pushcart prize and see what journals are on that list. But I say just start working on the book and doing what you need to do. And don't be afraid. I don't think self publishing is always the route. And I did that too. I mean, Truth has a very wonderful press, but I don't have the skill set to run a press at this point.
That's all right.
Um,
You have
and
another.
we might have to talk about,
You have many other gifts.
yeah, but we can think about that, right? Like, where do you feel like your skill sets are if you want to do that? What does it say? Do you think poets have a particular responsibility or ability to promote literacy among folks that struggle with it? Yes, that's the short answer. And I also feel like I was telling my MFA students at DePaul's Theater School, I said, there are more books published every year. The number goes up every year, more and more books, right? Which is why I can't keep up. But it's also a thing of, you have, everybody wants to write a book, everybody doesn't want to read one. So
Amen.
what makes your book stand out from all the books that come out in a year, or all the poetry books that come out in fall of 2022, and then a whole new batch of books come out in spring of 2022? What makes them pick yours, right?
Third World Press has a segment on its website for
Hmm.
submissions where they ask writers what makes their work different. So, as a part of their submission process, you have to be able to articulate
Right.
why your book is notable, why someone would want to publish it. I want to just take a moment to respond to the question about promoting literacy among uh, people who, quote, struggle with it. And I'm reminded of your book again. I do not believe that you are writing um, for any reason other than to edify the community, to help Black and Brown people, to to promote um, the well-being of humanity. I think that's the larger responsibility of all of us, and particularly human beings, and particularly Black folks who suffer under the weight of racism in this country and around the world. Yes, we have a responsibility to promote literacy, but not only that, to help each other however we can, to make the point that you so eloquently make in your book, that we're all connected across the country and around the world, that Patrick makes uh, world in the context of this broadcast. We're connected. I'm connected to Patrick, Del Rica, all those people um, who I met 15 years ago when I was just starting out, still here. many of them. I'm connected to those people, the folks in Henniker, to the rivers that keep us. We've always been drawn to rivers, Tara.
Yes,
We
we
have
have.
that in common. Chicago, New York. If you are alive and you're a person of color in America, you carry an anger, I think, and a sadness and an anxiety. To be able to respond to that, to confront that, we have to help each other. We have to promote healing. And that's what your
Right.
book does. Your book does that wonderfully well.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions anybody has?
Well, I would like to go back to that
Go ahead.
question about literacy really quickly. Um, Aside from looking at it from being a writer and a reader, um, we have to understand that so much of what's happened to Black people in America and people of color in America has been how language is used as entrapment and disempowerment, and how powerful it is to be able to name yourself, to give yourself permission in words, to be able to rename yourself. Like we go back to that all the time. And I think there's a reason why, slaves were forbidden to read. I think there's a reason why there was a literacy test to try to trap people from voting, before there was full suffrage for Black people in America that wasn't like circumvented by the poll tax or terrorism at the polls. Like those kinds of things are done intentionally because once you understand language and you can maneuver through it, you are more powerful. Once you can dismantle someone, like even if we think of simple things like people like us are called minorities. Well, we're actually the majority of the planet. You if you understand the language, you can start to deconstruct that. Like I don't even want to say pedagogy anymore. And people go, why? I said because the etymology of pedagogy ties back to slaves who waited for their young masters to be dismissed from their educational day to come and take them home. So even that has notes of enslavement and ancient slavery, but still. And I think about that all the time. It's like, what are the words that give us precision in empowering ourselves, right? But then also, if people write something down and you don't understand it, they can trick you, they can harm you, they can belittle you, and I want people to not know what that's like, you know.
Amen. That's going on right now as we approach the election. People trying to
Hmm.
trick people, uh, to hide racism in flowery language that sounds like it's fair and is not.
Right.
When you think about this book, what are the words that you would like to use to describe it? If you had to pin it down,
A word.
words,
Words.
words,
Okay.
whatever comes up.
I would say affirmation. I would say uh, a criticism of where we're at right now, and hopefully steps for thinking about what we need to continue to do.
Amen. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yes, 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 yes. Thank you both. Thank you both. I appreciate the camaraderie, the love that's evident. Shout out to the Cave Conum crew, and yeah, right. and I just want to say that yeah, this book I have to get my copy, okay, and I need it signed. All right. Um,
We can
I
manage that.
yeah, definitely. I'm buying it. I'm buying it. I'm supporting it. I'm telling everybody I know. I appreciate the words. Sometimes they sting, right? Sometimes they're sweet though. They sit on the tongue just right.
Mhm.
Um,
I saw there
sometimes.
was a quick
Oh, there's
question.
another question.
Yeah, I want to catch it before we run out of time. So I would say Gwendolyn Brooks, Angela Jackson, uh, probably Eve Ewing if you skew you younger. I love Danez Smith. I love Destiny Birdsong. There's a young poet. I think her name is. All right, I can't remember what her name is, but she wrote this beautiful book called "We Are Owed." So it's We Are Owed. And I want
Okay.
to read that. You know the book I'm talking about, Patrick?
No, but I'm gonna take. Look, I'm gonna look it up in 2 seconds. Hold on. We are owed. Watch
Yeah.
this.
I
We
did a reading with her and her work was beautiful. I was like, I want to read that book. So
we are
um,
owed Ariana Brown.
yes, that's it. That's it.
Yes,
Remember.
Ariana Brown. We are owed. Okay, well
Yes.
that's no, we need that. We need to and that's how you know you're a beautiful person, a beautiful poet, because you're not just like reading my stuff. You're like get what you can. You know what I mean? Soak in
Yeah.
all this artistry and all this
I
beauty.
try, man. And then
Yeah.
you guys got Elizabeth Acevedo around your way. And I remember when she was in high school and she's just,
Aces, yeah,
oh
yeah,
my
yeah.
God, the work she's doing is wonderful.
All over the place, man. Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't even know where she is now. You know they're dope when they're just gone, right?
Yeah.
You know, her
Yeah.
and Jason Reynolds. I can't even get them on the phone anymore. You
Yeah.
know?
You know, I have a book that Jason self-published when he still looked really preppy. You remember when he had the little preppy look? And he signed
Yeah.
it. He said, maybe someday we'll read together. And I'm like, shoot, maybe someday I'll read with you, Jason.
Right. I'm dying for the chance to be with him again.
I know. And he said, oh my God, I did. Like I saw him a couple years ago. He said, I did give you that book. Like he remembered all of a sudden.
Oh my gosh. Well, yes. Yeah. I remember seeing you and thinking the same thing. Oh my God, I want to read with her. So and
Well,
and
we
and
did.
here we are.
Well, we did our thing. We did Deaf
Yeah.
Poetry now.
Here we are. Here we are though. We'll get together and read again, I'm sure.
Bet.
I'm sure. Thank you, Truth, as always.
Thank you, brother.
Yo,
Thank you, Dr. Betts,
Thank you,
Brother
Truth,
Patrick,
Patrick, and
uh,
Mozzie.
and Brother
yes.
Mozzie. Yes.
Shout out to Mozzie for bringing this all together. I just want to tell everybody to stay tuned. We have some more coming up, more of the WBL Book Fair. And keep an eye out for these artists too. Refuse to Disappear. Let's put it up once more before we get out of here. No doubt.
Okay.
All right. Yo, buy the book. Buy the book. Support. Refuse to Disappear.
If you didn't see it the first time.
Right. Yo, love to you both.
God
Love
bless you.
you.
Love you too, brother.
Oh
All right,
man,
y'all. Stay safe.
All right. Take care.
safe, man.
All right.
Take care.
Bye bye.